48 Laws of Power, Chapter 35. Master the art of timing. Never seem to be in a hurry. Hurrying betrays a lack of control over yourself and over time. Always seem patient, as if you know that everything will come to you eventually. Become a detective of the right moment. Sniff out the spirit of the times, the trends that will carry you to power. Learn to stand back when the time is not yet ripe, and to strike fiercely when it has reached fruition. Starting out in life as a nondescript French semi-school teacher, Joseph Fouché wandered from town to town for most of the decade of the 1780s, teaching mathematics young boys. Yet he never completely committed himself to the church, never took his vows as a priest. He had bigger plans. Patiently waiting for his chance, he kept his options open. And when the French Revolution broke out in 1789, Fouché waited no longer. He got rid of his cassock, grew his hair long, and became a revolutionary. For this was the spirit of times. To miss the boat at this critical moment could have spelled disaster. Fouché did not miss the boat. Befriending the revolutionary leader, Robespierre, he quickly rose in the rebel ranks. In 1792, the town's Nantes elected Fouché to be its representatives to the National Convention, created that year to frame a new constitution for a French Republic. When Fouché arrived in Paris to take his seat at the convention, a violent rift had broken out between the moderates and the radical Jacobins. Fouché sensed that, in the long run, neither side would emerge victorious. Power rarely ends up in the hands of those who start the revolution, or even of those who further it. Power strikes to those who bring it to a conclusion. That was the side Fouché wanted to be on. His sense of timing was uncanny. He started as a moderate, for moderates were in the majority. When the time came to decide on whether or not to execute Louis XVI, however, he saw that the people were clamoring for the king's head, so he cast a deciding vote for the guillotine. Now he had become a radical. Yet, as tension comes to a boil in Paris, he foresaw the danger of being too closely associated with any one faction. So he accepted a position in the province where he could lie low for a while. A few months later, he was assigned to the post of Proconsul in Lyons, where he oversaw the execution of dozens of aristocrats. At a certain moment, however, he called a halt to the killings, sensing that the mood of the country was turning, and despite the blood already on his hands, the citizens of Lyons hailed him as a savior from what had become known as the Terror. So far, Fouché had played his cards brilliantly, but in 1794, his old friend Robespierre recalled him to Paris to account for his actions in Lyons. Robespierre had been driving force behind the Terror. He had sent heads on both the right and the left rolling, and Fouché, with whom no longer trusted, seemed destined to provide the next head. Over the next few weeks, a tense struggle ensued. While Robespierre railed openly against Fouché, accused him of dangerous ambition and calling for his arrest, the crafty Fouché worked more indirectly, quietly gaining support among those who were beginning to tire of Robespierre's dictatorial control. Fouché was playing for time. He knew that the longer he survived, the more disaffected citizens he could rally against Robespierre. He had to have broad support before he moved against the powerful leader. He rallied support among both the moderates and the Jacobites. Playing on the widespread fear of Robespierre, everyone was afraid of being the next to go to the guillotine. It all came to fruition on July 27th. The convention turned against Robespierre. Shouting down his usual lengthy speech, he was quickly arrested, and a few days later, it was Robespierre's head, not Fauci's, that fell into the basket. When Fauci returned to the convention after Robespierre's death, he played his most unexpected move. Having led the conspiracy against Robespierre, he was expected to sit with the moderates, but lo and behold, he once again changed sides, joining the radicals of Jacobs. For perhaps the first time in his life, he alienated himself within the majority. Clearly, he sensed a reaction stirring. He knew that the moderate faction had executed Robespierre and was now about to take power, would initiate a new round of terror, this time against the radicals. In siding with Jacobs, then Fauci was sitting with the martyrs of the days to come, the people who would be considered blameless in the troubles that were on their way. Taking sides with what was about to become the losing team was a risky gambit, of course, but Fauci must have calculated he could keep his head long enough to quickly stir up the populace against the moderates and watch them fall from power. And indeed, although the moderates did call for his arrest in December of 1795 and would have sent him to the guillotine, too much time had passed. The execution had become unpopular with the people, and Fauci survived the swing of the pendulum one more time. A new government took over the Director, and it was not, however, a Jacobs government, but a moderate one moderate than the government that had reimposed the terror. Fauci, the radical, had kept his head, but now he had to keep a low profile. He waited patiently on the sidelines for several years, allowing time to soften any bitter feelings against him. Then he approached the Director and convinced them he had a new passion: intelligence gathering. He became a paid spy for the government, excelled at the job, and in 1799 was rewarded by being made Minister of Police. Now he was not just empowered, but required to extend his spying to every corner of France, a responsibility that would greatly reinforce his natural ability to sniff out where the wind was blowing. One of the first social trends he detected, in fact, came in the person of Napoleon, a brash young general whose destiny he right away saw was entwined with the future of France. When Napoleon unleashed a coup d'etat on November 9, 1799, Fauci pretended to be asleep. Indeed, he slept the whole day. For this indirect assistance, it might have been thought his job, after all, to prevent a military coup. Napoleon kept him on as prime minister of police in the new regime. Over the next few years, Napoleon came to rely on Fauci more and more. He even gave the former revolutionary a title, Duke of Atrantano, and rewarded him with great wealth. By 1808, however, Fauci, always attuned to times, sensed that Napoleon was on the downswing. His feudal war with Spain, a country that posed no threat to France, was a sign that he was losing a sense of proportion. Never one to be caught on a sinking ship, Fauci conspired with Talleyrand to bring Napoleon's downfall. Although the conspiracy failed, Talleyrand was fired. Fauci stayed, but was kept on a tight leash. It publicized a growing discontent with the emperor, who seemed to be losing control. By 1814, Napoleon's power had crumbled and Allied forces finally conquered him. The next government was a restoration of the monarchy in the form of King Louis the 18th, brother of Louis the 16th. Fauci, his nose always sniffing the air for the next social shift, knew Louis would not last long. He had none of Napoleon's flair. Fauci once again played his waiting game, lying low, staying away from the spot. Sure enough, in February of 1815, Napoleon escaped from the island of Elba, where he had been imprisoned. Louis XVIII panicked. His policies had alienated the citizens who were clamoring for Napoleon's return. So Louis turned to the one man who could maybe have saved his hide, Fauci, the former radical who had sent his brother Louis XVI to the guillotine, but was now one of the most popular and widely admired politicians in France. Fauci, however, would not side with the loser. He refused Louis' request for help by pretending that his help was unnecessary, by swearing that Napoleon would never return to power, although he knew otherwise. A short time later, of course, Napoleon and his new citizen army were closing in on Paris. Seeing his reign about to collapse, feeling that Fauci had betrayed him, and certain that he did not want this powerful and able man on Napoleon's team, King Louis ordered the minister's arrest and execution. On March 16, 1815, policemen surrounded Fauci's coach on a Paris boulevard. Was this finally his end? Perhaps, but not immediately. Fauci told the police that an ex-member of government could not be arrested on the street. They fell for the story and allowed him to return home. Later that day, though they came to his house and once again declared him under arrest, Fauci nodded. But would the officers be so kind to allow a gentleman to wash and to change his clothes before leaving his house for the last time? They gave him permission. Fauci left the room, and minutes went by. Fauci did not return. Finally, the policemen went into the next room where they saw a ladder against an open window leading down to the garden below. That day and the next, the police combed Paris for Fauci, but by then Napoleon's cannons were audible in the distance, and the king and all the king's men had to flee the city. As soon as Napoleon entered Paris, Fauci came out of hiding. He had cheated the executioner once again. Napoleon greeted his former minister of police and gladly restored him to the old post. During the 100 days that Napoleon remained in power under Waterloo, it was essentially Fauci who governed France. After Napoleon fell, Louis XVIII returned to the throne, and like a cat with 9 lives, Fauci stayed on to serve in yet another government. By then, his power and influence had grown so great that not even the king dared challenge him. In a period of unprecedented turmoil, Joseph Fauci thrived through his mastery of the art of timing. He teaches us a number of key lessons. First, it is critical to recognize the spirit of the times. Fauci always looked 2 steps ahead, found the wave, and that would carry him to power, and rode it. You must always work with the times, anticipate twists and turns, and never miss the boat. Sometimes the spirit of times is obscure. Recognize it not by what is the loudest and most obvious in it, but by what lies hidden and dormant. Look forward to Napoleons of the future rather than holding on to the ruins of the past. Second, recognizing the prevailing winds does not necessarily mean running with them. Any potent social movement creates a powerful reaction, and it is wise to anticipate what that reaction will be. As Fauci did after the execution of Robespierre, rather than ride the cresting wave of the moment, wait for the tide to ebb to carry you back to the power. Upon occasion, bet on the reaction that is brewing and place yourself in the vanguard of it. Finally, Fauci had remarkable patience. Without patience as your sword and shield, your timing will fail and you will eventually find yourself a loser. When the times were against Fauci, he did not struggle, get emotional, or strike out rashly. He kept his cool and maintained a low profile, patiently building support among the citizenry, the bulwark in his next rise to power. Whenever he found himself in the weakened position, he played for time, which he knew would always be the ally if he was patient. Recognize the moment, then to hide the grass and slither under a rock, as well as the moment to bare your fangs and attack. Space we can recover, time never. Time is an artificial concept that we ourselves have created to make the limitless of eternity and the universe more bearable, more human. Since we have constructed the concept of time, we are able to mold it to some degree, to play tricks with it. The time of a child is long and slow, with vast expansion. The time of an adult whizzes by, frighteningly fast. Time then depends on perception, which we know can be willingly altered. The first thing to understand is mastering the art of timing. If you enter turmoil caused by our emotions tend to make time move faster, it follows that once we control our emotion responses to events, time will lengthen our perception of future time, open up possibilities that fear and anger close off, and allows us to the patience that is principal requirements in the art of timing. There are 3 kinds of time for us to deal with. Each represents problems that can be evoked by solved with skill and practice. First, there is long time, the drawn out, years long kind of time that must be managed with patience and gentle guidance. Our handling of long time should be mostly defense. This is the art of not reacting impulsively, of waiting for an opportunity. Next, there is forced time, the short time that we can manipulate as offensive weapon, upsetting the timing of our opponent. Finally, there is end time, when a plan must be executed with the speed and force. We have found that moment, and must not hesitate. Long time. The famous 17th century Ming painter, Chu Yong, related a story that altered his behavior forever. Late one winter afternoon, he set out to visit a town that lay across the river from his own town. He was bringing some important books and papers with him and had commissioned a young boy to help him carry them. As the ferry neared the other side of the river, Chu Young asked the boatman if they would have time to get to the town before its gates closed. Since it was a mile away and night was approaching, the boatman glanced at the boy and the bundle of loosely tied papers and books. "Yes," he replied, "if you do not walk too fast." As they started out, however, the sun was setting. Afraid of being locked out of the town at night, prey to local bandits, Cho and the boy walked faster and faster, finally breaking into a run. Suddenly, the string around the papers broke and the documents scattered on the ground. It took them many minutes to put the package together again, and by the time they had reached the city's gates, it was too late. When you force the pace out of fear and impatience, you create a nest of problems that require fixing, and you end up taking much longer than you had taken if you had taken your time. Hurriers may occasionally get there quicker, but papers fly everywhere. New dangers arise, and they find themselves in constant crisis mode, fixing the problem and they themselves had created. Sometimes not acting in the fast of danger is your best move. You wait, you deliberate slowly, slow down. As time passes, it will eventually present opportunities you had not imagined. Waiting involves controlling not only your emotions, but those of your colleagues who mistakes actions for power, may try to push you into making rash moves. If your rivals, on the other hand, you can encourage this same mistake. If you let them rush headlong into troubles while you stand back and wait, you will soon find right moments to intervene and pick up the pieces. This wise policy was the principal strategy of the great early 17th century emperor Tokugawa Ieyasu of Japan, when his predecessor, the headstrong Hideyoshi, whom he served as general, staged a rash invasion of Korea. Ieyasu did not involve himself. He knew the invasion would be a disaster and would lead to Hideyoshi's downfall. Better to stand patiently on the sidelines, even for many years, than to be in a position to seize power when the time is right. Exactly what Ieyasu did, with great artistry. You do not deliberately slow time down to live longer or take more pleasure in the moment, but the better to play the game of power. First, when your mind is uncluttered by constant emergencies, you will see further into the future. Second, you will be able to resist the baits that people dangle in front of you and will keep yourself from becoming another impatient sucker. Third, you will have more room to be flexible. Opportunities will inevitably arise that you had not expected and would have missed had you forced the pace. Fourth, you will not move from one deal to the next without completing the first one. To build your power's foundation can take years. Make sure the foundation is secure. Do not be a flash in the pan. Success, that is, building up slowly and surely, is the only kind that lasts. Finally, slowing time down will give you a perspective on the times you live in, letting you take a certain distance and putting you in a less emotional charged position to see the shapes of things to come. Hurriers will often mistake surface phenomena for a real trend, seeing only what they want to see. How much better to see what is really happening, even if it's unpleasant or makes your task harder. Force time. The trick in forcing time is upsetting the timing of others, to make them hurry, to make them wait, to make them abandon their own pace, to distort their perception of time. By upsetting the timing of your opponent while you stay patient, you open up time for yourself, which is half the game. In 1473, the great Turkish Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror invited negotiations with Hungary to end the on and off war the two countries had waged for years. When the Hungarian emissary arrived in Turkey to start the talks, Turkish officials humbly apologized. Mehmed had just left Istanbul, the capital, to battle his longtime foe, Yusan Hassan. But he urgently wanted peace with Hungary and had asked that the missionary join him at the front. When the missionary arrived at the site of the fighting, Mehmed had already left it, moving eastward in pursuit of his swift foe. This happened several times. Wherever there is emissaries, stop the Turks, lavish gifts and banquets on him, and pleasurable but time-consuming ceremonies. Finally, Ming defeated Yuzan and met with the emissary. Yet, this term for peace with Hungary were excessively harsh. After a few days, the negotiations ended, and the usual stalemate remained in place. But this was fine with me. In fact, he had planned it that way all along, plotting his campaign against you soon. He had seen that diverting his armies to the east would leave his west flank vulnerable. To prevent Hungary from taking advantage of his weakness and his preoccupation elsewhere, he first dangled the lure of peace before his enemy, then made them wait, all on his own terms. Making people wait is a powerful way of forcing time, as long as they do not figure out what you are up to. You control the clock, they linger in limbo, and rapidly come unglued, opening up opportunities for you to strike. The opposite effect is equally powerful. You must make your opponent hurry. Start off your dealings with them slowly, then suddenly apply pressure, making them feel that everything is happening at once. People who lack the time to think will make mistakes, so set deadlines for them. This was the technique Machiavelli admired in Caesar Borgia, who during negotiations would suddenly press vehemently for a decision, upsetting his opponent's timing and patience. For who would dare make Caesar wait? Joseph Devine, the famous art dealer, knew that if he gave an indecisive buyer like John D. Rockefeller a deadline, the painting had to leave the country. Another tycoon was interested in it. The client would buy just in time. Freud noticed that patients who had spent years in psychoanalysis without improvement would miraculously recover in just time if he fixed a definite date for the end of the therapy. Jacques Lacan, the famous French psychoanalyst, used a variation on this tactic. He would sometimes end the customary hour session of therapy only after 10 minutes, without warning. After this happened several times, the patient would realize that he had better make maximum use of the time rather than waiting much of the hour with a lot of talk that meant nothing. The deadline then is a powerful tool. Close off the vistas of indecision and force people to make up their damn minds or get to the point. Never let them make you play their excruciating terms. Never give them time. Magicians and showmen are experts in forcing time. Houdini could often wiggle free of handcuffs in minutes, but he would draw the escape out to an hour, making the audience sweat as time came to an apparent standstill. Magicians have always known the best way to alter our perception of time. It is often to slow down the pace. Creating suspense brings time to a terrifying pause. The slower the magician's hands move, the easier it is to create the illusion of speed, making people think the rabbit has appeared instantly. The great 19th century magician John Eugene Robert Houdini took explicit note of this effect. The more slowly a story is told, he said, the shorter it seems. Growing slower also makes what you do more interesting. The audience yields to your pace, becomes entranced. It is a state with time that wheezes delightfully by. You must practice such illusions, which share in the hypnotist's power to alter perception of time. End time. You can play the game with the utmost artistry, waiting patiently for the right moment to act, putting your competitors off their form by messing with their timing. But it won't mean a thing unless you know how to finish. Do not be one of those people who look like paragons of patience, but are actually just afraid to bring things to a close. Patience is a worthless, useless combination with the willingness to fall ruthlessly on your opponents at the right moment. You can wait as long as necessary for the conclusion to come, but when it comes, it must come quickly. Use speed to paralyze your opponent, cover up any mistake you might make, and impress people with your aura of authority and fidelity. With the patience of a snake charmer, you draw the snake out with calm and steady rhythms. Once the snake is out, though, would you dangle your foot above his deadly head? There is never a good reason to allow the slightest hitch in your end game. Your mastery of timing could really only be judged by how you work within time, how you quickly change the pace and bring things to a swift and definite conclusion. The hawk patiently and silently it circles the sky, high above, all-seeing with its powerful eyes. The below have no awareness that they are being tracked. Suddenly, when the moment arrives, the hawk swoops down with a speed that cannot be defended against. Before its prey knows what has happened, the bird's vice-like talons have carried it up into the sky. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which takes at the flood, leading on fortune, omitting all the voyages of their life, is bound in shallows and in miseries. There is no power to be gained in letting go of the reins and adapting to whatever time brings. To some degree, you must guide time, and you will be its merciless victim. There is accordingly no reversal to this law.